Hello, everyone. It's your favorite shrimp. I have some huge news for you. Um, the veto system has changed significantly. Many of you already know about this, but yesterday, on the 14th, it was first put into use, and the first veto using the system has taken place. So I wanted to quickly cover sort of those changes and answer any questions. Um, Obviously, as an NAT, I got notice of this happening beforehand. Um, but yeah. So basically, what the difference is from the previous system, and let me just describe the previous system real quick. The previous system, vetoes are about nominators being able to prevent a map from being ranked if there is subjective quality concerns, something that is not in the ranking criteria. Previously, it took one nominator to veto any map. You had to go and make a post on the map set thread, and if you did that and you said it was a veto, the map would be blocked until either the mapper resolved the concerns that the vetoer had and the veto was lifted, or the map set went to mediation and the BNG would vote the entire nomination or the entire BN group, right? All 100 plus nominators were called to mediate this veto and determine if it was something that they agreed with and it would be upheld, forcing the mapper to make changes in order to have it lifted, or maybe the entire BNG decided that the veto was not valid and they wanted to remove it, and in which case the map set could go on and get ranked. So some of those details are the same. Like the whole concept of the veto system is, of course, the same thing, right? Vetoes still exist. They're still for subjective issues. But what is different is that it now requires 3 beatmap nominators in order to have your map set ranked. So it's no longer just one member of the BNG being able to shut down a map from being ranked. So how does that work? Well, first, what a member of the BN does is they go ahead and submit an anonymous veto right here. They press this button, just like what game mode, put in the URL, type in the veto reasons, and then they hit submit. And then it shows up here in the pending vetoes page. Once it's in the pending vetoes, other members of the BN, and to be clear, members of the NAT cannot what's called a vouch for a veto. They cannot vouch for a pending veto. Members of the NAT can submit a veto, but they cannot be vouchers. And it takes 2 BNs to vouch for a veto in order to move that pending veto into the active veto section, in which case, then the members of the NAT, in this case, will make a post right here. They'll make a post on the thread saying that it has been vetoed and it has received 2 vouchers and the reasons for that veto. Then a veto chat room gets created between the host, the vetoer, the vouching BNs, and any GDers involved in that veto, right? So if the veto in this case for this map, it involves several of the GDs. If it involved none of the GDers, then none of the GDers were pulled in. Basically, only the mappers that are relevant to the difficulties in question get pulled into this private chat room. In that private chat room, then, the mappers and the BNs must coordinate to try to get that veto resolved. And if they can't get it resolved, then it goes into mediation. And in fact, that mediation process is very, very similar. One of the major differences, though, is that instead of it involving the entire BN, it is now a select group, a limited group of probably about 20 to 30 BNs per group. And I'd have to pull up the thing. Let me see. Uh, I don't have it on hand. Here it is. So this system was proposed in this proposal thread. So this major veto rework that Data proposed. And what's nice is that there's a couple graphics that sort of help explain what's going to go on, right? So you draft a veto, you post it to the BN site, then it gets 2 vouchers, and it gets posted to thread by the NAT bot anonymously. If it doesn't get those 2 vouchers, it gets discarded and nothing happens. Then the NAT invites the mappers and the vetoers into a moderated private chat room. It's moderated directly by the NAT. Now, like I said, the member of the NAT cannot vouch for a veto because they can't serve as the vouchers. They can post the veto, but they can't vouch for the veto because if they were not the vetoer themselves, then they lose that anonymity because we have moderator permissions. So because we can see who the vetoer was, we then have that conflict of interest, that bias. So that's why from that point on, we are only allowed to serve as moderators. So you'll never have a veto from 2 NAT members or 3 NAT members. It can only be 1 NAT members in any veto, effectively, from this point on. In that moderated private chat room, either the changes get made and the vetoer / vouchers vote on those changes. If 2 out of 3 agree with the changes, then the veto gets dismissed. If 2 out of 3 decline the changes, like it wasn't enough, then you go back and you continue discussing, right? And if the decision is made that you just can't come to an agreement, then either the mapper or the BNs can request mediation. The mapper can request mediation entirely on their own. They don't have to interact with anyone. However, in order for the BNs to request mediation, the vouchers, there has to be 2 out of 3 of those vouchers that vote for mediation to occur. Something that isn't listed here as well is that it takes 24 hours for the option to move on to mediation to appear. It is locked for the first 24 hours of the veto, just to force some conversation to happen, right? You can't just go right into mediation like you previously kind of could. Once mediation is requested, you have 2 groups of BNs to vote. And what is sort of unique about this, right, is that you have these 2 groups of BNs, and it is not dividing it in half of the entire nomination group. What it is doing is taking like a sample of like 60 BNs, and it's dividing those 60 BNs into 2 groups. The reason that we have 2 groups is that if both groups uphold the veto, then the veto is upheld. If both groups dismiss the veto, it gets dismissed. And if there's a split decision, like one of those groups upholds it, the other one dismisses it, then the tiebreaker is going to be a community vote. So anyone who is not a member of the BN or NAT can then go onto the website and vote to have that tiebreaker vote. And so that involves the community on sort of more controversial or indecisive sorts of votes, which is interesting. That community vote occurs at exactly the same time as the mediation itself. So all this stuff is happening at the exact same time, and only will the community vote matter if both of the BN groups are not in agreement, if there is sort of contentions there. So yeah, beyond that, it's really like very similar. The actual mediation process is exactly the same as before. You get presented with the veto reasons, and you have to decide whether you agree or disagree. So what's cool is that the members of the community who are not members of the BN sort of have their own mediation process that they can participate in. The only difference is that they can't leave comments, whereas members of the BN can leave comments. But beyond that, it's sort of the same voting process. So it's really not that complex of a rework. It's really not that complex of a system, in my opinion. But it is different, and it is a bit more complex than the previous system. What's nice is that we have these 3 members of the BN or NAT that have to make this veto happen, and everything happens into this anonymous chat room. However, with this first veto using this system, we've run into sort of some complications. For example, the one problem that we currently have, and all these things are going to be changed, is that um, the way it works is that when the veto gets presented in the pending vetoes and the vouchers go in and accept it, once two vouchers happen, it immediately goes into the active vetoes, whereas the vetoing BNs are, and the vouching BNs and the vetoer BN is anonymous to each other. You have no idea who vouched for the veto. And that makes it very difficult to coordinate your messaging. And, it might be that a voucher for that veto disagrees in part with some of the scope of that veto, but because everyone starts out as anonymous, or everyone is anonymous, it's difficult to coordinate your messaging and narrow the scope, for example, narrow the wording, be consistent, I guess. And so what's going to happen is that in the future, pending vetoes, once there's two vouchers, it will go and de-anonymize the vouchers and the vetoing BN such that they can then coordinate. And then once they've coordinated the scope of the veto, the wording, all that stuff, then it can move into the active veto and you can start off on the right page. For example, one downside with this one was that because the system was very new, the original vetoing BN didn't realize that it was going to immediately go into the active veto stage, so they didn't, in their initial submitted reasoning, right, when they put in their reasoning here, they didn't submit the full details of like which exact maps it applied to, and that created confusion as to which maps was this veto actually applying to. Simply because of it's a new system, right? There's going to be some kinks. One of the other things that's going to change is that the mappers themselves, which are currently everyone is anonymous, the mappers themselves are not going to be anonymous anymore. In the future, in future vetoes, the system will change so that mappers are not anonymous. Only the vouching BNs will be anonymous to each other, or to the mappers. They'll not be anonymous to each other, but they'll be anonymous to the mappers. And that's just because, you're talking to these mappers, you vetoed their maps, you know who they are, but it becomes very confusing, especially with large groups. This is really a limit test kind of veto because there's so many mappers involved that it becomes difficult to figure out what the hell is going on, and you kind of know who's there, but when everyone is labeled anonymous user 1, anonymous user 2, anonymous user 3, I think that's very difficult to track the conversation. So that some of those things are going to change. So yeah, I think that is about it. Let me make sure that I've covered everything. Oh, so mediation, one of the things that used to be is that when mediation occurred, all members of the BN were called, and you were not required to vote, although you are recommended to vote. So usually we got around 50% to 60% of the entire group voting on each veto. Moving forward, if you're summoned for a mediation, you will be required to vote. And if you can't, you get replaced. You have to let us know, let the members of the NAT know, and you get replaced on that veto, on the mediation. And of course, NAT moderating powers only, except if the member of the NAT was the person who drafted the veto and put it in pending in the first place. If the member of the NAT submitted that anonymous veto, then they can be a part of that veto itself. But if they didn't submit it, they can't vouch for a pending veto. So there's that. I just really want to emphasize that because there is a lot of confusion about that. And I do recommend, for sort of further details, you can check out Pishyfat's veto system explainer video. There was a couple things that I wanted to emphasize that were not included in this video, but Pishyfat's video sort of walks through the nitty-gritty of exactly the buttons and how it looks internally. I can't click on this one because you'll see the chat room, so that's not what I want to do. But you can kind of see, you'd had discussion logs appearing here, and you can type and submit posts, reveal your username here. Again, by default, everyone is anonymized. That aspect will change moving forward or in future vetoes, just because hey, this is the first veto that we've been using in this new system. There was some complications, right? There was some things that we learned and we didn't like, and so we're going to go ahead and change those and make it a little bit easier to work with. Um, of course, you can always, including the vetoing BNs, choose to unanonymize yourself, right? And that can be very useful. But the nice thing is that the system really helps prevent ganging up on the vetoing BNs. Um, and it forces there to be more than one, right? So there's not going to be that one BN who just really hates this map and or the mapper, right? And they're going to go on a tirade. It requires a little bit more investment, and because it's so heavily moderated, this private chat room, um, people who abuse the system will just get completely kicked from the BN or get otherwise moderator punished, right? If they're a mapper or whatever, then they'll get punished. But BNs who are abusing the system, absolutely, there will not be any toleration of abuse, and they will very likely get kicked if they abuse the system. Um, so it's really supposed to encourage good faith discussion moving forward. So yeah, if you have any questions about the system, please do let me know. Um, and there will be more information coming in a public announcement in the near future. But because the system is fully in effect and there was a relatively high profile veto already in the system, I did want to make a quick video on the system and make sure that some of those questions and clarification things were cleared up. So, yeah, it's as simple as that.